Can we talk about prejudice and class struggle? Because America was founded at a time when the old systems of like class and hierarchy were being done away with, or at the very least, were experiencing severe upheaval. During the 18th and 19th centuries, ideas of class, nobility, monarchy, hierarchy, and the natural social order were in a period of unprecedented upheaval in European history. It was at this time that America was founded. Some would argue on idealistic notions of equality and freedom. However, this equality never applied to everyone. In the founding documents, it is made quite clear that this equality only applies to white males. In fact, many of the founding fathers wanted to restrict voting rights to those who were educated and landowning, believing that others did not possess the faculty to direct their own fates. While they called it democracy, to modern interpreters, it might seem more like an oligarchy. But it is important to note that that does closely resemble the earliest forms of democracy that we know of. In ancient Greece, in Athens, only Athenian males who were born as free men, who had completed their military service, and met a number of other requirements were allowed to vote. And the intent of the founders was never for everyone to have agency in their own lives, only those that they perceived as worthy. Over time, however, those who held power were forced to open the gates and allow more individuals into the ranks as society changed. Their strict definitions of who was worthy of voting power and citizenship were wedged open by waves of immigrants and by the engines of social change that were inevitable after the fall of the monarchy as the primary system of government in Western society. And it became increasingly necessary for those in power and those who wished to preserve the hierarchical nature of society to come up with new and innovative ways to maintain their place at the top of the social order. So perhaps one of the most effective of these techniques, especially in America, is the way in which prejudice has been fomented in America as a means to divide the working classes. Through hate, fear, and prejudice, the ruling class turn the working class against one another. It's profitable to keep the working class at each other's throats rather than allowing them to unite in opposition to their masters. Misogyny, racism, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, etc., they're all have been used as a means for those in power to divide the working class and direct our anger towards each other, splintering what should be a unified movement against the elites. Such a unification of the working class should, or at least could, have naturally followed the downfall of monarchies as the primary societal system. The downfall of the monarchs and the nobles who supported them was primarily spurred by the working classes uniting with young, educated members of the middle classes. This is one of the reasons why today there's such an effort in America to separate the educated from the working classes, even though many in the working classes are educated and many that are considered educated either work or have worked in the working classes. There's this effort to divide and turn them against each other. I made a whole nother video recently about anti-intellectualism within the United States. But in this particular case, these efforts were corrupted in America and were redirected into a sort of unconscious oligarchy that has existed in one form or another throughout our history. Instead, class consciousness, racism, misogyny, etc., became primary sources of identity in America. Rather than identifying with other members of the working class, we tend to identify by ethnic group, racial group, gender, and so forth. Now, none of this is to collapse misogyny, racism, homophobia, or anything else into mere accessories of class power. They are their own issues, but it is to recognize that these systems of oppression can be marshaled, manipulated, and monetized by those who would benefit from a divided workforce. Prejudice often becomes a tool for creating competition for resources. jobs, housing, education, dignity. And the more scarce the resources, the greater the animosity that can be fomented. The architecture of class society thus becomes self sustaining. One of the primary mechanisms here is to divide and conquer, maintaining friction between segments of the working class in order to prevent them from uniting against the ruling class. Historically, corporate campaigns have exploited gender, race, and sexuality to derail labor movements. For example, during broader worker struggles in the 20th century, employers touted family values or offered equal opportunity trinkets while resisting real gains in pay, benefits, and job security. The underlying promise is support the system and your identity is rewarded within its terms. Now, prejudice can be monetized through consumer culture and media narratives that frame social issues as personal moral failings rather than systemic injustices. The resulting grievance politics distracts from material questions such as wages, automation, offshoring, taxation, and the concentration of wealth. When people focus on symbolic battles, solidarity around economic demands frays. And again, this is not to say that we should not focus on equality and eliminating oppression and inequality in our society. That is very important. But these are the ways in which the powerful have used those ideas to distract from what they are doing. Now, access to signals such as consumer brands, housing in desirable neighborhoods, or respectability becomes a wedge issue that reproduces class lines under the guise of morality. Prejudices can be deployed to normalize surveillance and punishment that disproportionately targets marginalized communities, reinforcing obedience to the social order. Policies framed as moral protection or national security often deepen state and corporate control over the bodies and lives of marginalized groups, while the economic system remains unchallenged. Labor markets benefit from a disciplined workforce that internalizes blame for personal failures as a consequence of unworthy identities. This mental economy makes quiet concessions, temporary layoffs, offshore sourcing, wage stagnation more palatable. Access to capital, political influence, and media presence remains unevenly distributed along lines of gender, race, and sexuality. Those who benefit from the existing hierarchies fund think tanks, political campaigns, and cultural productions that naturalize the inequality. The result is a self reinforcing loop. Prejudice legitimizes unequal outcomes, and unequal outcomes reward prejudice in turn. There are many clear examples of this in America, such as the gender pay gap framed as a women's choice issue. When employers justify lower wages for women by pointing to career interruptions or personal decisions, they mask structural barriers that limit advancement and bargaining power. This argument helps preserve a wage structure that profits from persistent inequality while individualizing blame. Policies that primarily punish certain communities through policing and mass incarceration create a surplus labor pool and discourage collective organizing and bargaining in those communities. This dynamic benefits employers, who can then threaten employees with replacement from a depoliticized pool of workers, undermining solidarity along racial or other lines. Many companies in recent years have touted supposed diversity in their companies. However, many employers tolerate or even celebrate diversity in marketing while resisting changes that secure stable, well paying positions for LGBTQ or other marginalized types of workers. The specter of moral objections can be used to oppose union demands or anti discrimination protections that would improve pay and working conditions for all. So, in the end, we can learn from this that we must build a movement that challenges both prejudice and class power. In order to achieve this, we must center class analysis without erasing the harms of bigotry, acknowledge gender, race, and sexuality as real, inherited systems of oppression that intersect with economic justice, rather than one being more of a driving goal than the other. A movement that only demands higher wages without assessing the underlying social hierarchies will fail to disrupt the power that maintains those hierarchies. So it's sort of the way I think about it is intersectionality brought to class struggle and prejudice. It is the intersectional way to sort of meld those. And I have said before that any struggle against oppression should view any other struggle against oppression as kin. I mean, we're all trying to fight the power. So rather than using separate movements with separate goals, in this case, I'm saying that we need to unite those movements and those goals rather than allowing the powerful and the right to pit those movements against each other. But we must build cross-identity solidarity around shared economic stakes and organize around concrete demands that improve living standards for all workers. Universal access to healthcare, living wages, safe and dignified working conditions, and strong protections against retaliation for organizing. It is absolutely essential to oppose the uses of prejudice by power by publicly documenting how rhetoric about morality or tradition serves economic interests, and by creating counter narratives that connect personal experiences of discrimination to structural economic policies. We need to invest in inclusive leadership and coalition building. We must ensure that leadership from marginalized communities is central to strategy and decision making. Coalitions must be genuinely participatory with transparent processes for accountability. Through these steps and more, we can rebuild the labor movement in this country into a fierce force of opposition to the wealthy and powerful, and one that unifies us rather than dividing us.